After releasing yesterday's ranking of various versions of the Chaos Engine video, I thought I'd do another one of my personal favourite Bitmap Brothers games, so this is Gods. This game released back in 1991 and was also released by Bitmap Brothers using their own Renegade software label. Originally, Gods was released for both Amiga and the Atari ST. Eventually, several other platforms had their own conversions of it. I will say that the version I'm used to playing the most is of course the Commodore Amiga version, and good lord, this is a tough game. But like I have said before, Bitmap Brothers games are known to be challenging games, likely even more challenging than your run-of-the-mill old-school game. What sets Gods apart then? There are a ridiculous amount of platformers for old systems. Well, I could say that the colours used in the Commodore Amiga's version is just stunning, and so for the Atari ST too, especially when walking along rooftops and seeing the sky, which has a gradient effect which just looks really awesome. I could say that although there is actually no in-game music as such, only a short tune before the game begins, the sound effects are incredible when destroying things. It certainly packs a punch and truly sounds like you've had a victory. In addition, it does have a seriously great introduction tune, which reeks in early 90s. So the gameplay itself, if you haven't played this one before, it's a platforming puzzler with Agent Grease as its theme. It has puzzle elements, but really aren't that annoying like some platformers could be. Battle your way through mythical creatures using a range of weapons. Now, precision is required for jumps in this game. We can also carry several things in the inventory, such as keys and other bits and pieces, which come in handy at some point. Some random info for you: the TurboGrafx CD and Game Boy Advance were supposed to have conversions of Gods, but were both cancelled for unknown reasons. So obviously these two versions won't be here. 2018 also saw a remake of Gods, which will not be included here either, as I do like to focus on the original releases in this series where its competing platforms were 30 years ahead. So anyways, ranking from worst to best, here's Gods.
The wonderful into the wonderful.
Traditionally or originally, Gods was a fairly slow-paced game which allowed players more time to do things such as slowly walk to edges or platforms to make precise jumps. Otherwise, we'd fall and either lose a life or die entirely. The Super Nintendo or Super Famicom releases totally ignores the point of Gods and goes all guns blazing. Mindscape released this version in 1992. I have read reviews online for this version. Pretty much anybody who has played this all come to the same conclusion. It is just way too fast and really for no good reason. Sure, some players of this version might look at the original game and say they were too slow, so there is that argument to make. But for myself, I prefer the much slower version where speeding along like Linford Christie isn't a thing. Most notably, this version has totally different music to the Amiga and ST's versions. We also have some fairly annoying background music too in the game itself. Sound effects are of course included, but nothing particularly special. Some SNES games went on to be instant classics. This game certainly didn't, and for good reason too. Even those nice gradient backdrops from the source material have been replaced here with buildings in the backgrounds. It's just very messy. There is a possibility that the speed was purposely coded like this so kids wouldn't get bored. Who knows? I will say on a positive note that the parallax scrolling looks really good here. We have another ultra-fast version of Gods, this time for the NEC PC98, likely similar in pace to the Super Nintendo version, which is a real shame, because the music and presentation here with this version is superb. The introduction music is similar to the original games, although no voice samples here. We also have in-game music, which is much more tolerable than the SNES version. The real reason that I rank this here is that this felt more like Gods, despite its Sonic the Hedgehog speed. The introduction video is in Japanese text, but we have an almost sexualized character being animated. Very bizarre stuff. So yeah, the game itself looks fantastic, and we also have a plain blue backdrop when reaching tops of buildings. This Japanese version released by PCM Complete in 1992. If you like Gods to look similar to Amiga and the ST games but with increased speed, this isn't a bad choice to go for. The in-game music also kind of reminded me of Streets of Rage, a little bit bizarre. A slight upgrade from the SNES and PC 98 versions, the Mega Drive or Sega Genesis version actually comes with an options menu, which is interesting because yesterday's Chaos Engine video, it turned out that the Sega Mega Drive also had an options menu there too compared with other versions. The options menu lets you enable or disable hints during gameplay, so as computer veterans of this game will realise, this 1992 Mindscape release is also on the fast-paced side, but nowhere near as the infamous SNES version was. This was actually a little more enjoyable to play because of that. Now, just like the SNES version, we have an animated introduction here, which is, to be fair, very nice on both of these platforms. The colour palette here is slightly toned down from the SNES version too, and honestly, it doesn't look that bad. My gripe with this version is purely down to the pace being much too fast in the computer versions, and the music and sound effects which are totally different from the computer versions. Again, we also have in-game music here, which is a little bit better than the SNES offering, but still equally annoying and just doesn't resemble much of the Ancient Greece sound. Mega Drive is also, in my opinion, kills the gorgeous backdrops again to be replaced with buildings. Controller wise, this is pretty nice to control and pretty responsive. I also found that jumping off ladders was easier here too. Just like the SNES version, we also have a HUD with this release where we can see the inventory without having to press the fire button to access it. Something else I notice is a bizarre sound when killing flying creatures. The Atari ST released at the same time as the Commodore Amiga version. I am going to firstly say here that this was a tough call between this version and the next version in this video. Reasoning being is that this version felt a little more fast-paced. Yes, you heard me correctly, fast-paced. Now, as Gods is a slowly-paced game on the Amiga versions too, it was an easier task to get this running fairly well on the ST. In terms of visuals here, the Atari ST's version is slightly duller compared to the Amiga's counterpart. Now, that isn't to say this isn't an acceptable version by any means. It looks highly polished, and of course, with talent like the Bitmap Brothers working on this game, why wouldn't it be? It controls nicely when pressing up or down on D-pad or pressing the fire button and D-pad to access the inventory. All of this is nice and fluid. Now, as to be expected, the music isn't so great. We are effectively dealing with a 16-bit computer with an 8-bit sounding sound chip. But even still, for an 8-bit sound, this actually sounds really good. Not the best, of course, and destroying those creatures doesn't sound as deep as the Amiga's version. My favourite part of the game is looking at the gradient backdrops, which represents the sky. This isn't as merged as the Amiga's version here, but still looks good, even if it does look liney in comparison. Overall, a really good game on the ST despite a couple of cutbacks. Next up, we have got the IBM PC compatible version of Gods. Now, firstly, providing you have a Roland LAPCI sound adapter, you can actually have in-game music with this version. Although I didn't enable this, as to be fair, I hate the music in the console versions, and I have no doubt this will be any better. I think Gods is just better as a game of sound effects. This released in 1991 from Renegade themselves, so visually the game looks pretty much identical to the Atari ST's version, and we do have the added option for music in-game, of course, which, as we know, I decided not to. However, we do get a more sturdy and quality sounding introduction with that 90s beat going. Now, as we know, the Atari ST's 8-bit sounding version would likely be no match to everything else in this list. Although the sound effects aren't brilliant with this release, they are certainly an upgrade from the Atari ST's version. Hit collision detection is absolutely spot on here. I actually found this version slightly harder than the average version of Gods. Controlling the character in this game was also very good. So we have gotten to the platform where a few morons will criticise the way I pronounce this system. Normally they are linked up with my idiots of YouTube video, which was actually designed for people like this. So let's face it, pronunciationism purists, we surely cannot talk perfectly like you do. Otherwise that would mean being standardised, and being standard is normal, and being normal is, in my opinion, really boring. Anyways, the point is I can actually say Archimedes. Archimedes, there I did it, and the reason I say Archimedes is that I'm reading from a script, and the way it's spelled, it just naturally comes out is Archimedes. But anyways, for those concerned about the way I pronounce certain things, I just did it. There, I've done it. Archimedes, whatever. So anyways, back to the video. We have the Archimedes version. See what I did there? Now, this is almost on par with the next version. It looks like the Amiga version for sure. Sound effects aren't quite as beefed up as the Amiga's game, but are fairly good compared to the ST's tinny sound. One feature which is taken away is that the whole sky situation is not got the background buildings, of course, it's actually a plain blue backdrop here, which I personally think looks much better than the console versions. I don't know, I just think having buildings in the background just makes the game look really messy. Anyways, this is a really nice game to control too, and the pace of the game is on par with the Amiga in ST versions. After playing all the various releases of Gods, some that were far too fast, some didn't actually match my preference and colour scheme, and one that was insanely difficult, it comes to no surprise that, in my humble opinion, the Commodore Amiga wins as the best original way of playing Gods. It offers a nice balance of having a speed that aids you to make jumps with precision, and a really nice use of colour palette too. The Nation 12 track of Into the Wonderful is probably the best version, and if you want to jump back to the 90s or the true early 90s dance style music, then without a doubt this is the version to go for. Sound effects also means a lot to me with this game. When killing enemies, its bass sound complete with creatures screaming truly sounds incredible here, especially if you have an Amiga hooked up to a hi-fi. Although I have always meant well to attempting to take out the first boss and getting further into this game, I have always failed miserably. I am sure I am far from alone there. Everything here is just so well done, including detailed sprites and textures that are highly defined. It goes without saying, but the game really is something to behold with an Amiga or Philips monitor. I will note for people interested that the Amiga CD32 had a port back in 2015, and very randomly, the Atari Jaguar also has one, which you can buy a physical cartridge and a box, which released back in 2022. So anyways, that's it for ranking the various different versions of the awesome Gods by the Bitmap Brothers. Which version did you have? Are you dead against me by saying that the console versions were just way too fast, or do you agree this game is actually played better slow paced? Anyways, let us know as always in the comments, and until next video comes along, thanks for watching.